Hey developers, today we're doing something really cool. We are going to create a backend Firebase function that we can use to create a Mad Libs type of API that will create PDFs. So I think this is great for people who are looking to get into Firebase functions, who want to understand what serverless is. So we're going to create a basic function that takes in a JSON payload and then converts it over to a PDF like the one you're seeing right now. Obviously, this isn't very exciting. It just has some lorem ipsum text, but you can see that we could, this is pretty powerful. We can do a lot of really cool things with this, so make sure you stay all the way to the end. Oh yeah, and if you haven't seen, I actually have a really cool comprehensive course on Vue.js 3.0. The link will be in the description and also in the comments. So this is a really neat course that I've been working on. It covers everything you need to know to get started with Vue 3, and actually it's a pretty good starter for Vue.js in general. But it covers things like composition API, Vue model updates, TypeScript in Vue 3, fragments, suspense, and much more. I'll make sure I'll put a link in the description, so please check it out because it really helps me when I run this channel. All right, so the first thing you need to do in this tutorial, if you're listening along, is make sure you have a Firebase account. You can go to firebase.google.com or console.firebase.google.com, or I think just firebase.com, and you can sign up for a free account. And the nice thing about it is that if you sign up for a free account, you can actually be, right as of this recording, they have like a $300 credit when you add your billing plan to it. I'm not going to go into that, but the way, essentially what you want to do is you sign up for firebase.com and it'll ask you to go to the Google dashboard and you can set up billing. And that's important too. So first thing, if you're following along in this tutorial, you've never signed up to Firebase before, make sure that you just create one just dummy project, even before we do anything. Just go here, click the add project, put in some random name, and you don't see it here, but there'll be a box that says confirm you accept the terms of service from Google. You need to actually select that box, create a dummy project before you can use the Firebase CLI. I actually was running into a weird error every time I was trying to create an account using the command line utilities for Firebase, and it never worked. So I had to actually go in here and create just a basic project first and accept the terms of service before things will work. So make sure you do that first. Second thing is I have Visual Studio Code open up here, and I actually have some tooling installed. So first, if you want, make sure you have Node installed. Now the versions of Node that run on Firebase, I believe you can select between Node 10 and Node 12 as of this recording. Maybe in the future they'll add 13 or 14. So you may want to try to have your Node version match the one that's going to be running when you get it up onto the Firebase function. Now, if you've never used Firebase before, Firebase functions are a way to, like, basically you're going to put endpoints online that you can contact or trigger from anywhere, from your app or from somewhere else. And the nice thing about that is that you only get charged when it runs. So there's obviously a few caveats with Firebase. Firebase functions, like every other serverless function out there, there's a kind of a cold boot startup time. So if you haven't used it in a while, it takes a few extra seconds to run. And so it can be a little bit slower, but if you have constant traffic, that's not a big deal. So there is some minor problems with Firebase functions or with any kind of serverless approach that you use. And that's how I'm going to talk about that. I don't want to confuse people. So I have my folder here. I have Node installed. So the first thing you want to do is actually install the Firebase, install Firebase itself. So you there is a couple of commands. Let me see here. It's npm install. So I have you have to do this command first. I'll go and make that. I did the npm install tacg Firebase tools, and I think you can do the same thing if you're using Yarn. And this is the Firebase tool set that you'll need to do work in the CLI. And I would highly recommend to use this because it makes things much easier and you can set up projects easier. After you have that installed, the first time you run Firebase, it might ask you to log in. So you'll do Firebase login, and it'll pop up a window which will require you to log into your account. So I'm not going to do that now because I'm already logged in. And then you'll need to type in Firebase init. So I'll do that right here. So this is going to ask us a few questions. You can see here at the bottom of the screen, it asks us what we want to do. We can do database, Firestore, functions, hosting, storage, emulators, remote config. I think most people think about Firebase, they think about the Firestore and the database stuff, but we're going to really look at two things here. One is the functions, and we're going to actually have a bucket as well where we can store files. But I'm going to create a new function. I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it madlibs YT 2020, and I'm just going to hit enter here. And so this will go ahead and create the Google Cloud Platform project for us. Now, if you run into errors after it does this, then you might have a couple issues. One is you didn't create a project inside Firebase, a dummy project, and select and basically approve the terms of service, or you may not have a billing account set up. You can see here, you can go to console.firebase.google.com. I believe it's the Google dashboard. You can set up billing, and then you can select the project that you created and make sure, and you can add billing to it. So if you ever run into issues, that's what you need to do. I'm not going to show that part because I don't want to show you my billing, but here it is. So in this tutorial, we're going to use TypeScript. I think it just makes sense, and it has this really nice feature where we can use IntelliSense to figure out what to do. So we're going to use TypeScript. And so don't worry if you don't know TypeScript and you're watching this right now. I'm going to go slowly. I'm not going to use too many TypeScript features, but I'll show you that it's nice to have. And I'm just going to hit enter here for ESLint, and it's going to ask me if I wanted to install some dependencies, and I will hit yes here. So this will just take a moment. Cool. All right, it said it added everything we need. So if we look inside our editor here, we have our functions, we now have a source folder, and we have an index.ts, which is for our TypeScript. Now, one thing I like to do is we're actually not in the right folder, and you'll see here in a second. If I go to index.ts and look at inside here, and I don't know, I'll uncomment this out. You'll see right away I get like this red squiggly line error that says it cannot read the tsconfig file. That's because we have the bigger folder, we have the whole folder opened, but not the individual functions folder. So what I like to do is I just kind of open here, and I'm going to open up the functions folder. I'll make sure I'm in the right one. Firebase, madlibs, YT, functions. I'll open this folder. Cool. So now if I open this up and I uncomment this out, you can see here I'm not getting any weird squiggly lines. I'm not getting any errors, which leads me to believe that it's working correctly. So we'll see here in a second. One thing, I'm going to open up that terminal again. So now we have this terminal here. I'm going to save it. I'm going to see if this is what comes out of the box with Firebase functions when you use TypeScript. To give you a little idea what it's doing is if you look inside the package.json, it kind of adds everything you need. It uses this TSC, which is the TypeScript compiler. And if we run npm run serve, it's going to build and then run this emulator, which we can then use to basically test out our Firebase functions. And this is what I always recommend, is before you do anything, make sure that you can run it first in your emulator. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work when you push it up to your Firebase function, because there is differences between your local environment and once running in the cloud, but it's a good first start. And also make sure that you're in the functions folder when you run this. So I'm not going to do anything different here. I'm just going to run. If I do npm run, basically it tells me all the commands I can run. So I'm going to do npm run serve. And let's see if it serves this file for us. All right, great. So it is running. If I make this console a little bigger, you can see what it's saying here. It says that the emulator is running. By the way, it says that you requested Node version 12, but you're running 14. I'm not going to worry about it. I guess I could switch to 12. Like I said earlier, I'm going to leave it as is, and it tells you where your local host is and where you can run the function. So I'm going to copy and paste that, and I'm going to go back to my my window here, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to open up a folder, a new tab, and I'm going to hit enter here. Cool, and I get my hello from Firebase. So I know it is at least running locally and things are working. So that's a good start. But obviously we want to do a few more things with this. So I'm going to install a few libraries. So I'm going to Control-C this, and I'm going to do npm install, and I want to install tacd, which means it's going to be in the development dependencies into our package.json file. And make sure you run this inside the functions folder. I'm going to do @types, and then I'm going to do node. And that'll get the types for Node.js, which will make sure that when we can see basically the IntelliSense for the Node.js types. Perfect. And then we want to add in a few other things. I'm going to install Puppeteer. And I'm going to cheat here a little bit because I actually ran this earlier. So I'm going to first run the npm install @types Puppeteer. And that'll install the types for Puppeteer. And I'm going to find the other one, npm install Puppeteer. So now I'm going to install this as a dependency, not a dev dependency, because we're going to use Puppeteer to help create our PDF files. All right. And you can see here this might take an extra second because it's going to download Chromium, which is the way it will be able to open up different sites and take screenshots of them. So let's just take a moment. All right, so that's installed, and we're going to install one more, and it's going to be called Handlebars. And Handlebars is going to allow us to take HTML, which has the double curly brackets, and basically put information inside them. It's kind of a neat little library, and I'll show you how that works in a moment. Okay, so I think we have everything we need. One other little setup that I'd like to do first is to make a quick change to this Firebase function after we push it and deploy it. So we haven't done anything different here, but I want to deploy this to our Firebase server. So I'm going to type in deploy here. And so this is the command. By the way, I'm just searching for commands I've run in the past just to make this a little quicker. If I do Firebase deploy -- only function, this will deploy our function to Firebase. So let's do that real quickly, and it'll just take a moment. All right, actually, you can see I actually got an error here that I don't have the billing correct for this. So I wasn't going to show this, but I guess I'll show this real quickly because this happened. So what you need to do if you do get errors about your billing plan not found, you can go to console.cloud.google.com, and then inside here you'll see all your different projects. And you may see this little drop down here, so you can click this drop down and you can choose all, and then you can choose the project you just created. I just created this Madlibs YT 2020. Once you click on there, it'll bring this up, and you can click on billing, and then it'll ask you if you want to link. This project has no billing account, so if you have another Google account that has a billing account, you can go ahead and create a new billing account by going to manage billing accounts. But I already have one from another account, so I'm going to click link a billing account, and then I'm going to choose my billing account that I created earlier. I'm going to click set account, and so now this should have a billing account associated with it. Yeah, that should be that. Now, one thing I noticed is after I link the billing account, sometimes it takes I don't know, a few minutes after doing that for it to recognize it, so I sometimes have to wait here a little bit. But let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and just push it again and see if it works. So I'm going to deploy it one more time, and now since I have a billing account, we'll see how far we get. Okay, cool. It said it went ahead and created it. So now we have a real URL. I'm just going to copy and paste it so I can bring up my other screen here. And if I bring this up, I get a hello from Firebase. So now we've been able to run it locally and in the cloud. And by the way, I just want to show you one other thing. Here's the billing section, but if I go back, so if I'm in here and I can actually type in cloud functions, and this should show me all the cloud functions for this Madlibs YT 2020 project. So you can see here it is, and you can see the memory allocated 256 megabytes. For what we're doing now, since we're creating a PDF, it actually needs a little bit more. And this is something you can always kind of play around with too whenever you create a Firebase function. I don't know why you can't do that actually in the Firebase console. So if I refresh this, I should see the new project I created. Yeah, so here is this Madlibs YT 2020, and you can go inside here and go into functions, and this functions will show you the function you created, and you can see the logs, but you can't really change anything in here. So to actually change things, you need to go to the console cloud Google place. And if you click on here, you can actually edit this function. I got to click on it to get in. And this will actually have a little bit more information. It has a little nicer logging, I think. Even has even more graphs, and the logs look a little bit better. So I would highly suggest go to console.cloud.google.com to do a lot of things. And now if I click edit here, I can change the configuration for it. So I'm going to go into the advanced settings, and you can see here 256 megabytes. I'm going to just bump that up to 2 gigabytes and just leave everything else the same. I'm going to click next and then deploy. And this won't change any of the code, but it will just make it a little bit bigger. So next time we push our code, it'll have a little more size. And this just takes a few minutes to do. It'll sit here and just spin for a while. While it's doing that, though, we can get to coding. So I left the name Hello World. Obviously, if this was a real production app, you probably would want to change the name. I'm just going to leave it for Hello World. But we want to do a few things here. First, I'm going to delete this logger. We want to download a file from a bucket. And I'm going to show you that file in a second. We're going to read new file from temporary storage. We want to grab data from the request.body and create a new HTML file with handlebars. We're going to create a new reference. Create a new reference to a new file and create a PDF. And then we're going to send the file back in the response, the PDF. And then finally, we're going to delete the files from the temporary storage. So not temporary storage, but the temporary file system. So this is our game plan that we want to do to get everything up and running. And I mentioned we're going to create a file. And you saw before I had that PDF file that was just really basic. We can actually create that using HTML and CSS. So I'm going to create a template here. A template. Well, let's do this. Let's make it a folder. So I'm going to create a folder called template, and inside template, I'll move it to I'm going to move it to the root. Doesn't really matter, but in this template, I'm going to create a new file called madlib.html. And we're going to use a little HTML5 here, so I'm going to do HTML:5, and we'll call the document. We're going to make this really simple, madlibs. And if I wanted to, I can style this. I can add a style tag and do a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to do any styling here. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to call this header. This is where handlebars comes in. It has the double curly brackets. This is the mustache syntax. We're going to have a paragraph. I'm going to do lorem 20. That didn't work. Let me try this again. Lorem 20. There we go. And I don't have word wrap or any pretty or anything installed here, so it's going to look kind of ugly. So I'm just going to take a couple of random words here, and I'll put word 1 and word 2. And what I'm doing here is, if this was a real Mad Libs, this would be like a story, and in the story we would have different parts of the story where we would ask the user for a word, and we might ask them for a noun, a person, place, or thing, or an adjective, or a verb, and then we would replace everywhere this double bracket is with those words, and kind of make a funny Mad Lib story, and that's what that is. Since we are not going to go to that far right now, we're just going to create kind of this back end, but I just want to show you how this would work. And I can convert this to a PDF pretty easily. I can do a bunch of styling with it too. So now, since we've created this madlib.html, I want to get this inside a bucket so our Firebase function can retrieve it without having to do anything. So here is our functions. Here's our other console at console.firebase.google.com. What I can do is go to storage, and it's going to ask me if I want to get started. I'm going to get started, It's going to tell me that here is the basic rules it sets up, and you could change this. And I'm going to just put in US Central, and that's going to create this default bucket for us, and this just take a second. All right, look, we have a brand new bucket, and we can upload a file to it. So I'm going to upload file, and I'm going to grab my madlibs. I think I'm in the right folder. Let me just double check. I have 2 madlibs folders. Here, this function. Now I have this new template. I'm going to click on it, and it's going to upload. Okay, great. So we have it now uploaded. So we are in business now. I want to be able to download this file inside my function, my Firebase function, so I can do some things with it. So now we have kind of our outline of what we want to do. I'm going to import some stuff in here, but we'll do this in a second. One thing we want to do is we want to use some tools so we can access that bucket. So I'm going to import. Oh, and another thing, well, I'll show you a second. If we import admin from Firebase admin, you'll notice it's giving me a few errors. So first, it's probably thinking that we are not using it. First, admin is declared but never used. So let's try to declare it. Do admin dot initialize app, initialize app. But you can see, notice right away, I didn't get any, when I did this admin dot, I'm not getting any of my IntelliSense, so something's not right here. If I hover over this admin, it says that can only be default imported using the ES module interop flag. So that's interesting. So one other thing you need to do to really get TypeScript working correctly is to add that in there. And we can just go under tsconfig, ES, there it is, ES module interop, and we'll just set that to true. And then when we save it, and we come back here, now the red squiggly line goes away, and if I type in admin dot, now I get my IntelliSense, which is really cool. So now I can see initialize app is the one I need. And I want to create a bucket. So I'm going to create a bucket here. I'm going to do admin.storage.bucket. And this is going to just default to the default bucket. If I have multiple ones, I'll have to obviously worry about that. So that's really neat. Now I have a admin, and I have a bucket that I can use and grab information out of. So let's go and do the first thing. Let's download the file from a bucket and see if we can get that working. So I'm going to first, I'm going to use the local template, and I need to actually kind of create a location that tells the bucket where to download to. And since we're using a Firebase function, we have actually a temporary folder that we can download information to. Now, this temporary folder may or may not be there every time we run. It's always there, but the files we download may or may not be there. And it's best practice in Firebase to always delete any files that you download to the temporary file system. So to do this, we're going to use this path, which I haven't imported yet, but it's going to be path, which I'll do that right now. So there's a number of Node, there's a bunch of Node file system utilities, which are really handy to use. So this one is going to be, I'm just going to import path from path. Easy enough. And by the way, if you are used to Node.js, you notice that I'm using imports everywhere. I'm going to be doing that instead of require because we're using TypeScript and just makes way more sense. And I'm used to using imports. I'm just going to import a few others while I'm at it. I'm going to import OS from OS because we need that as well eventually. And there is one other, but I'll get that in a second. We're going to come up to that in a moment. So I have path. Now if I do dot, now I have my IntelliSense, which is really nice. So I'm going to join, and I'm going to use this OS temp directory. And let me bring back my import from my OS. And I'll delete here. So OS temp dir. So that's going to give me the temp directory. And then I'm going to call this local template.html. I can name it whatever I want, but that makes sense. Template.html. That makes sense. Now this is just setting a file location. This is literally going to put in /root/temp/56734, whatever the location of the file system for their temp directory is. Then I'm going to use some async awaits. So I'm going to make this async. And that way I can just keep going here. I'm not going to use promises. I'm just going to use async await. I just like it a little better. And also, I'm not going to, normally you would surround this by a try catch or use like some sort of decorator to catch errors, but I'm not going to do that just for this sake of this one. So we called it madlad.html. We're going to do .download. And then it has this options. And by the way, if I didn't know like what the heck is this option is, I can click download. I can look at the source, download options, and I can see that it's basically a object that has a destination in it. So that's one way if I didn't know what to do here. So I have this, it's an object. It's going to have this destination. And now I can put in the destination, which I've already created, called local template. So it should download the files to that local template, which is nice. All right, so we have our first part. Next, we're going to create a source. And this is what I want to do is I'm going to read that file that we just downloaded. So I'm going to wait it. And this is where I need a new file system, a new import here. And it's called FS for our file system. So there's something called promises. So there's the old version of the file system from Node, this promises. Oh, essentially there's a kind of a newer and older version. The old one is FS, and then it basically was synchronous, and it you had this callback that you had to deal with. But they have a newer one that's called promises. But I don't want to call it promises, so I'm going to alias it to FS. So that means I'm going to use FS. So this is basically fs.promises. So now I can await FS. I'm going to use this read file. I'm going to pass in the location of where it's at, a local template, and I'm just going to mark it as UTF-8. And I think I don't have to do that, but I'm just do it just because I don't know, it just makes more sense to me. But yeah, I think you can leave off the UTF-8. So now I got to grab data from a request body and create a new HTML file. So I'm going to create a new one called I'm going to call it lab, doesn't really matter, lab info source. And I'm going to assume that someone's going to send something over in the request body. And by the way, I haven't mentioned this yet, but we have two parameters, a request and a response. And you can look inside here if you do the IntelliSense. You can see a request is what's coming in. So you have this base URL, you have cookies, you have connections complete, you have a body, you have fresh, you have a host name, a whole bunch of information that's coming in. This is the request that's coming into the server. And then the response was what you're going to send back out. If I can spell it right. Response. Well, we'll look at that in a second. So the response is basically what you send back out. And the request is what you receive in. Now, there is libraries like Express and a whole bunch of others that create middleware that make dealing with a request or response object much easier. However, since this is a Firebase function and this is pretty easy, we're not going to bring in the whole Express framework just for this. But it does have some nice features. And we might bring in cores later, but there's one way you can deal with cores that's very simple. All right, so now we have this request body, and I'm going to create this file called HTML. And now we're going to use handlebars. Now, I need to import it in, so I'm going to import in handlebars from handlebars. Easy enough. So I'm going to handlebars, and this is going to have a compile option. And first one, I'm going to put in the source, and then I pass in the MATLAB info source. And this is what's going to do. It's going to take the request body, which you're going to, let's assume the request body looks like this. It's going to be some JSON object. That's going to kind of look like this. And it might have, it should have that header. Let's see what we call it. Header, yep. It's going to have a header with some info in here. And then it's going to have another one here called word1, and it's going to have information there. So that's essentially what's inside this. And it's going to take this and look at the HTML we created, this one, and wherever those words match, in that JSON, it's going to insert those words in. That's how we're going to do our, that's basically how we're going to do our Mad Libs. Cool. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is create a new reference to the new file and then create the PDF. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it local PDF file. And I'm going to do my path.join again. And I'm going to do OS temp directory. And then I'm going to call it local PDF file.pdf. So this is essentially creating a location where we're going to have our PDF file. And now we need to create the PDF file. So I'm going to create a new function called create PDF. I'm going to pass in the HTML and local PDF file that we just created. So you could do this a few ways. I could create a whole folder structure, import this in, make it all nice and clean, but for the sake of this little demo, I'm just going to create my own function for it. So I'm going to create async function, and we're going to call it create PDF, and it's supposed to take in 2 files. So we're in HTML, which is a type string, and a local PDF file, which is also a type string. Now this is kind of giving me an error here. By the way, I always like to put a return at the end of these, otherwise sometimes it gets upset at me. So in this create PDF, we need to do a few things. So we need to first import something new. It's called Puppeteer. It's going to be Puppeteer from Puppeteer. And this is what's going to allow us to do like a headless Chromium browser and create a PDF file. So I'm going to write some code here. I'm going to fast forward this so you can see what it looks like after it's all in here. Okay, so I have it all in place here. So I'll show you what I did. So I have this const browser, and this is the Puppeteer launch. And this just says that we're going to disable the sandbox and disable set UID sandbox. We're going to create a new page on line 44. We're going to use this set content, which essentially we're going to take everything that was passed in that HTML and set it. Then we're going to create a buffer, and we use this page.pdf, and this is the function that creates a PDF, and this is the power of Puppeteer. So we tell it the format. We're going to have A4. We're going to print in the background true, and then we're going to put some margins, and I kind of played around with this, and it just had it centered a little bit nicer. And then we're going to return a synchronous function, basically a promise, this fsWrite file. So this is another file system Node.js. It's going to write the file coming from this in this local PDF. This is the directory or in the source. We're going to pass in the buffer, and then we put the encoding as base64. So that's what this create PDF is going to do. Good. So that should create the PDF. And you always got to be careful when you do a lot of awaits that you're not accidentally doing multiple things at the same time and it breaks something. It should always wait until something's done and then continue on. Just be careful with that. And now since the file has been created, we should be able to send the file back. And to do that, I'm going to do response. And we're going to set the header. And I'm going to put the content disposition, and then we're going to put attachment colon, or maybe semicolon, and then file name equals local.pdf, and then we're going to do response status 200, and then I'm going to send file and send the local PDF, and it should be send file should be smart enough that I don't have to set the file type as application PDF. So you can set more headers in here, and you can set the content types and all that, but this should work. And the last thing we want to do is delete the information from storage. So we have this F file system. There's this unlink, which will delete it. So I can just pass in the local template and the local PDF file. Actually, I'll do one at a time. I'll do await fs unlink local template. I'll do PDF file first, and then await fs unlink local template. And then we'll delete this response, and then we'll return. And obviously we want to make sure that we send the file before we delete it. So this should obviously be sent first before it deletes it. Okay, so if we did everything right, it should create our file. So we can test it out now. So remember, go npm run serve, and we'll see if we see any errors. Okay, so it ran, it compiled without any issues. And now we have this local host, but this time we really want to grab the data out of the post. Now, we could have done a few things here. We could have, if someone doesn't send something over post, this thing will break. So we could put like a if statement, if request dot method does not equal post, like return. But you can do that yourself if you want. So I can do this a few ways. I'm going to use Postman to send this over. And actually, this is an older version of Postman. But you can certainly, if you wanted to, use curl or postwoman or whatever you want to do it. So I'm going to put this in, and I don't think we have a word 3, but we have word 1, word 2, and a headline. Is it called header? Let's see. Header, word 1, word 2. So this should be header. And then word 1, 1, 2. And what I did is I chose post here. Make sure you do post. I changed body to raw, and then I send it as a JSON. So let's see what happens. I'm going to click send. Oh, it says it can't find no such object. So let me see what I did wrong here. I did madlib.html. Let's see here. Oops, here I put madlib.html. Let's try it again. And by the way, every time you change it, you have to stop and restart the server so we can compile it again. Otherwise, it won't work. So we'll stop and restart it. We'll compile it again, and we'll go back to Postman, and we'll send it. Okay, no such file or directory. So now we have the other error. So let's see what else we did. Okay, so actually I missed one thing here. I did the classical blunder where I didn't actually check to see if this response was sent before I try to delete the files. So you can do something called response.on and then look for finished. And as long as finished is done, then it'll go ahead and delete the file. So I went ahead and added that in there. I think there's, just doing some research, I think you might run into some problems with if it errors out. But for the sake of this simple demo, we'll just assume that it finishes it correctly. And then once you see this finished, then it'll go ahead and delete the file so we don't have any weird issues where we delete the files before it's sent. So I'm going to run npm run serve again, and then we'll see if this works. So it's going to run the TypeScript compile on it. And now it's done. So now I'm going to come over here to my Postman. I'm going to click send, and it's loading. And this time I get a message that I got a response. So I'm going to put that into my desktop. I'm just going to call it madlibyt123.pdf. Now, if I was doing this through a web browser, obviously I'd make sure that it did that correctly. And so let's take a look at that file. Okay, so here it is. You can see madlib's test, lorem ipsum. Looks like it replaced a few of the words, Erik and Bob. So cool, it went ahead and created my PDF for me. So that was simple. So you can see here, here's the code. I'll make sure that this code is up on GitHub. So if you guys want to try it for yourself, just make sure you set up Firebase correctly. It's not too difficult. I mean, the biggest issue anytime you're doing things like this and you're using a lot of promises and you're waiting is that you got to make sure that you don't run something synchronously while something else runs asynchronously. And like we had the problem here where we accidentally deleted it before this got finished sending. So you just got to be aware of those weird things and those weird issues. So I appreciate it. If you guys like this and you want to see more, I definitely could do the front end with Vue and create a whole Madlib's front end interface, but I'm not going to do it unless this video gets a few thousand views and let's say a few hundred likes. If I make it up to 500 likes and 6,000 views, I'll go ahead and make an update to this video where I create the front end, and we can also do some more tweaks here, maybe add in some more error handling. I think it'd be kind of fun to bring this full circle and do a full app, but I think this will give you a good idea of the power of Firebase functions. So leave a comment below, let me know what you think. I appreciate it. Thanks, take care.